Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to do a wrap up of some of the recent thrillers and mysteries I have been enjoying lately. I have a good mix here as usual, so let's get started. First, let's talk about some of the big buzzy books, and I read The Institute by Stephen King. I wasn't actually planning on reading it right away. I'm trying for the most part to read through more of his old catalog. I find that I'm really enjoying some of his first works, but this one just had so much hype online and it just sounded so good that I decided to skip ahead and go right for it, and I'm really glad I did. If you don't know, it's definitely a sci-fi thriller book. It's not horror, even though it's Stephen King, and the premise is basically that it follows a group of children, but primarily set from the perspective of a young boy named Luke, who is kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken away to a place called the Institute, where people conduct experiments on him because he has telekinetic powers. And it's basically their story of trying to survive and get out of this place. And it's a very fast-paced adventure story. It reads very quickly, even though it's over 500 pages. I flew through it, and there's just lots of action. I will mention that while the premise of the book talks about this kidnapping, the first 40 pages of the book focus on a different character, which is a little bit off-putting when you pick up this book and you're kind of confused why you're learning about this man. It does tie in later, but even if you're not grabbed by those first 40 pages, I would encourage you to push through, because honestly, they didn't really grab me, because once the actual story got started, I was very much pulled in. I should mention that I did this as a buddy read with Jason, Regina, and Shaun. If you're looking for more booktubers to follow, especially those that read a lot of horror, they are great channels to check out, and I will link them down below. Definitely buddy reading it made it a lot more fun because we got to theorize and come up with different ideas. If I had a criticism of this book, it's the fact that it's not overly original. I pretty much could predict where the story was going for the most part, and Stephen King really never tries to build in any great twists or turns. Instead, he very much walks you through where the story is going to go. Now, other people have mentioned that they didn't like the politics in this book. It wasn't very noticeable to me, and I only really paid attention because I'd heard other people criticize that aspect. And I'll say that if you don't share Stephen King's politics, you might not like that in this book, but I definitely enjoyed a few little rubs and kicks at Trump, so I didn't mind that at all, and I just felt like it worked within the story, so not a problem for me. Overall, I would enjoy it. If you're looking to pick up a Stephen King book, I would actually say this is a really good place to start. It's very streamlined and doesn't kind of have the junk that people often complain about when it comes to Stephen King. What I mean is that really weird or offensive stuff that can be a turnoff to especially sensitive readers. So if you're just looking for a fast-paced story and you're not looking to try one of his horror books, this is, just a really good place to start. Next, I read a book called Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, which probably a lot of you already know about, but if you don't, this is about a girl named Jules who is running out of money. She is down on her luck when she gets an amazing opportunity to house sit in an expensive, exclusive building in New York City. It seems too good to be true, and there definitely are some warning signs when she moves in because it's very strict, it's very unusual, and it just seems not quite right, but you know what? They're paying cash, and she needs the money, so she goes for it. That's the basic setup, and this story is very much inspired by Rosemary's Baby, but I did get a chance to read Rosemary's Baby as well, and I do feel like while the book has a lot of nods to that one, it very much stands up on its own. As someone who has read both works, I really appreciated those little nuggets in it, but it didn't spoil the book for me whatsoever and really just enhanced my experience. I should mention that I did this as a buddy read with Jade from Bedtime Bookworm, who reads thrillers as well as horror, fantasy, and science fiction. I definitely recommend checking her out. She's one of my favorite booktube channels these days and an online friend, honestly. And we read this along with Julie, who had already read it, but she kind of chattered along with us, and we had a lot of fun talking about this book. I think thrillers just work really well as buddy reads because you get to like theorize on what's going to happen, and we definitely had some guesses that were way off, but at the same time we were able to predict a few of the things that happen. I will say that I read a ton of thrillers, so the fact that I was able to predict some of the things didn't bother me whatsoever, and I'm really happy to say that while I guessed some things, Other things in the book completely surprised me, and I love that about Riley Sager. He is one of the few thriller writers who can consistently surprise me, and I think I know where he's going. I think I'm being really smart, and he realizes that he can pull me along and then twist my head around and go somewhere else, and I really like that. I'd say that he's probably one of my favorite thriller writers at this point. I've expressed before that in general I have gotten tired of the genre, but he is one that I will consistently pick up. I like the fact that while he writes thriller books, he definitely brings in elements of horror, and I liked with this one that I really didn't know which way it was going to go. It definitely felt like a realistic thriller, but at the same time he kept hinting at things that seemed like they could go supernatural, and you know I love when that is a possibility. So this one definitely kept me on my toes. It was very addicting. I just flew through it. I did read it as an audiobook, which was a great experience, but either way, I think that you will very much enjoy this one if you are a fan of thrillers, and even if you're like me and are a little bit tired of the genre, this is still one to pick up, especially if you're someone who reads more horror. Again, I think those nods to Rosemary's Baby will really just enhance the story for you as well. So definitely recommend that one. So much fun, and I'm glad I finally got to it. Now for something a little bit different, I also received a duology of books and read them back to back. The first one is The Line Between, and the second one is A Single Light, which are both by Tosca Lee. And these two books I received from the publicist Creative Edge. And these are really unique because, like I said, it's a complete duology, so I got the entire story in just 2 books. But this follows a woman who is kicked out of a cult and is forced into the regular normal world. However, as her cult had predicted, the world is possibly going through an apocalypse, and it's just a really interesting blend of a cult story, but also that post-apocalyptic story that I know so many people love. And this book was interesting because, of course, you have this cult aspect where they're saying the world is going to end, things are going to be bad, and then things actually are pretty bad when she gets outside. And it was just a really unique premise, and that's what pulled me in. These books are honestly a little bit different than the kind of books I'm normally drawn to. I do really find cults fascinating, and that's what initially pulled me in. I'll say that the first book is much more focused on her experience in the cult. So if you're someone who's just fascinated by that experience, that very controlled situation where you have a patriarch leadership and there's rules and religious overtones, that's a lot of the first book. And then the second book plays much more heavily on the apocalyptic side. So if you like people running around trying to survive, trying to get food, that is much more the second book. And if I had a criticism of these books, it's the fact that they didn't feel overly original. I've read a lot of cult books before, and this book definitely had followed that same narrative, and same thing with the apocalyptic side. I felt like I had seen people survive in similar ways and it wasn't doing anything new. But what made the book feel fresh, or the books rather, is the fact that it blended the two genres together. And I've never seen such different genres blended together, and I just found that fascinating. In terms of storytelling, I think Tosca Lee is really talented because she pulled me in, even though again these really aren't my typical genre. They're much lighter in tone than the books that I normally read. There definitely is more romance than I need in my books, but if that sounds like the kind of story you would enjoy, I would recommend picking them up. They were like 3.5-star reads for me, but I could see for someone else, if this is like your genre, if this is your thing, then you will probably love these books even more than I did. But really interesting to read, really fun, and yeah, those are my quick thoughts on these ones. And finally, last one I want to talk about today is called Nothing More Dangerous by Allen Eskens. This is the book that I received from the Canadian division of Hachette Group, and I was so grateful to receive this ARC because if that name doesn't sound familiar, Allen Eskens is one of my all-time favorite crime fiction writers. I love his books. I have gushed about them so many times on my channel, and what I like so much about him is the fact that he writes very different stories. Each of his books is just very different from the others. Some of them are more thriller, some of them are more law focused or based around an amateur detective, and this one is very different again. Unfortunately, it was different in a way that I didn't particularly enjoy, which was very disappointing. The general premise is that it follows a a woman who has disappeared out of this small town, and she is possibly blamed for taking money and stealing from the company that she worked with. But at the heart of the story, this is very much a story about race. It is set in the past, and you get to see how this small town has very small minds about people of color. And it's an interesting story, but especially when it comes to stories about race, I would have been more interested in this book if it was written by an author of color themselves, which Allen Eskens is not. And I just didn't really connect with it. I describe this as the kind of story that would be in a book club, and I'm not a big fan of book club books. So while it had the premise of being a mystery and it did have a woman disappear, it really wasn't the focal point of the story, and there really was no suspense to this book. Instead, it was very much about the characters and the town, and I just needed more action on the page. I definitely can enjoy a character-driven story, but I still need a reason to keep turning the pages, and I struggle with this one, honestly, which is so disappointing. All that being said, I still very much value Allen Eskens as a writer. I think he's very talented and skilled, but this one definitely missed the mark for me. It's very different and not connected to his other books. So personally, I recommend going with any of his other books like The Life We Bury or The Heavens May Fall. But if you're interested in checking this one out, it's up to you whether or not that sounds like the kind of book you would enjoy. So that is it for this video. I would love to know if you enjoyed this thriller wrap up, because I don't read tons of thrillers on my channel anymore, but I used to. And I do still occasionally pick up the genre, but I'm always hesitant whether or not to include them in these videos, because now I'm known more for reading horror, science fiction, fantasy. But if you enjoyed hearing about these books and would like to see me do more of these videos again in the future, let me know down below in the comments. Otherwise, don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and I will talk to you again soon in another video. Okay, bye-bye.